Good evening and welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo and I am the State Section Director for MUFON LA. We have a very interesting and provocative, thought-provoking program for you this evening, entitled From Resistance to Cooperation with the Keepers. Abductee Jim Sparks is one of the most intriguing voices on the UFO scene today. His book, The Keepers, relates his experiences with a variety of alien entities over an 18-year period. The book features an introduction by America's preeminent abduction researcher, the late Dr. John Mack. Sparks has an unprecedented 90% recall rate for his abduction experiences with no reliance on hypnosis. Art Bell called his marathon radio interview with Sparks in December of 2006 clearly the best abductee interview we've ever done. Sparks was leading a normal life as a successful and happy married business executive when his life was turned upside down by his abduction experiences. Initially very fearful and angry, he did everything in his power to resist and thwart the efforts of his captors. As things progressed, however, Sparks' attitude towards the aliens deepened in complexity as he underwent training in ET symbol recognition and went through exercises designed to enhance his ability to communicate telepathically. Over time, Sparks' relationship with the aliens relaxed somewhat as he began to better understand the purpose of their visits here and their intentions towards humanity. During his riveting talk, Jim Sparks will tell you about his epic journey and the nature of the Keeper's message for all of us. Would everybody please join me in welcoming warmly Jim Sparks.
Hey everybody, can you hear me? Am I audible? It's great to be here. Hello. Hey everybody, it's great to be here. Well, let's see, prior to 1988, as far as I was concerned, yeah, there were such things as UFOs. I never really followed the phenomena and certainly had no awareness of the abduction aspect of it. Prior to '88, I simply believed that the cosmos is a giant place with the billions of stars and then billions of planets rotating around these stars as suns. The odds were pretty good that one of these planets would house intelligent life and perhaps even pay a visit here, and that would be about it. For myself, I consider myself to be a logical, honest, down-to-earth person, and I never would have believed that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, perhaps even more, are being pulled, and I use the term pulled instead of abducted, out of their homes, out of their cars in the middle of the night or the middle of the day on a global basis, and certainly not myself. So for me, at the age of 33 or 34, and this was about 19 years ago, is when all this started. And it started out of nowhere. It started abruptly. I had no memories of as a child, per se, even being part of any of this. In the last 19 years, I break it down in three sections. The first 6 to 7 years were horrific, traumatizing. The motives of operation behind these beings, which I should say that better than 95 to 98% of the interaction that I've had in the last 19 years are with beings commonly referred to as grays. The first 6, 7 years, the method that they used was fear, isolation, and confusion. I loathed them. They came out of nowhere, pulled me out of my house in the middle of the night, conducted emotional experiments, forced me to learn, force-learned with punishment reward sessions to learn symbols, converting block lettering into symbolic form, extracting semen. You name it, they did it. And Those first 6, 7 years, all I wanted to do was kill them. In the second period, from the 6th to the 7th year to approximately the 12th or 13th year, I started seeing an agenda. I started seeing a purpose. I put down my anger. I put down my hatred because I actually started seeing what these non-human intelligent beings were basically up to. In the last 5 or 6 years, it has evolved to the point of where interaction is not necessarily in an abduction scenario, but I see a big picture, and I'm going to be sharing part of that with you today. A couple of things I'm going to point out or bring out this evening, which I think you'll find interesting, is that I'm going to discuss why it's so difficult to interact with these beings and why they are so far removed from what we are. There's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of things inherent with these creatures that make it extremely difficult. Now, one must bear in mind, again, I'm going to be talking about what are commonly referred to as grays. And there are things in their nature that make this thing very difficult. Also, I'm going to show a video. It's about 30 minutes long. What's significant about this video is that there was a gentleman that I had interacted with on board on my beginning to the end of my 6th year, somewhere in the 6-year period. It was a 2-hour mass abduction where there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people involved. This particular individual was someone who, I should mention, I was paralyzed primarily the first 6, 7 years of my abduction experiences, and this is when I was allowed freedom. This particular gentleman, there was intimate contact where I saw him right from the beginning of the abduction scenario and helped this guy and worked this guy through the entire 2-hour period, which was phenomenal, which I'll get into. But what I think is important here is the fact that I did see this person several months later on here in our lives, and did not say anything to him when I saw him. And I'll go into that story as to how, what that mass abduction was about, which was an environmental lesson, so to speak, which I think will inevitably come to the point where it reaches the globe, where there'll be literally millions of people knowing what to do, and I'm starting to see a conscious awareness of that, particularly environmentally. How this individual went from someone who's not really concerned with this stuff, and I watched him flower over the years before he knew who I was, and finally that was revealed to him, and how that environmental lesson that all those hundreds and hundreds of people were getting night after night after night into the thousands, the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands on a global basis, how this message slowly unwinded in this person, and I watched him flower into the person he is today, which is pretty remarkable. Excuse me. Also, the video is going to show is going to pay tribute to the late Dr. John Mack, Professor Mack of psychiatry at Harvard. And so I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy that. But the significant thing is that I went through many years of not knowing what was going on to somewhat understanding to evolving to seeing a plan, and that I'll share with you, and how it involves other people and how they flower into it. But I should start off discussing the nature of what are commonly referred to as grays and why it's so difficult to interact with these beings. For starters, their minds think anywhere from 10 to 100 times faster. They're 100% telepathic. They can take data, assimilate data 10 to 100 times faster. They're telepathic, so one feels rather intimidated, particularly when you're new and associating with these beings. And it's an intimidating feeling knowing that there's something that's quick. In fact, they're so fast in their thinking that before you can even utter a sound to ask a question or think a question, there's already an answer, and it's before you even put it together in your mind. They have the ability to screen image, meaning that the minds are powerful, whether it's a natural ability or whether it's technically enhanced. Either way, it's there, which means they can transmit images in your mind and lead one to believe that they're actually living out these things. These beings have nothing but 100% thought-activated technology. So everything that they do, anything that moves mechanically, is thought-activated. These beings have the ability to travel dimensions, and I'm sure most of you know there are other dimensions. They occupy the same space, the same time. Perhaps they vibrate at a different frequency or whatever makes them invisible. They are here, and they can use these dimensions to work with, meaning that, and it's, by the way, I take a total science, technological approach to this whole thing, and that's what maintained my sanity in those early years in particular, which 5% of their essence can be in this dimension, which would mean physically they would be invisible. If 10 or 15% of their essence was in our dimension, then they would take on a ghost-like appearance where you can see them. And depending on whatever work that they want to do here determines as to what percentages of their working essence is in this dimension or another one. So for example, if they're just observing, then maybe 2 to 5% of their essence is here and 95% is in another dimension. If they need to move physical objects, then 50 or 60% of their essence has to be here, which makes them look pretty solid. These beings have the ability to go from point A to point B in the cosmos without little to no time passing. They possess the technology of invisibility and the technology to do where matter will behave in a way where the laws of physics don't seem to apply, which means that's why some people have seen these things walking through walls. Now, what makes it even probably the most difficult, and again I'm referring to, excuse me. Oh, by the way, this was not a, Jolie, this was not a full thing. It was used. Yeah, thanks. Where they radiate an energy. And this is what makes it real difficult. There's an energy that comes from their being that is miserably uncomfortable to a human being. Again, I'm talking about grays, if they're even anywhere from 100 or 150 feet away, you sense a presence that does not feel good. When they're within 25 to 50 feet, your spine will straighten up, your breathing will start getting fast, your heart will start to race. When they get within, let's say, 5 or 8, or don't quote me specifically on the footage here, but when they get within 5 to 8 feet of you, then all the chemicals in your brain drops into your body. Fear, adrenaline, hate, love, everything you can imagine that dictates the way we are just dumps into your system. And then if they're within a couple of feet, thanks. Excuse me. And when they're within a couple of feet, you'll normally black out. Now, when you put all that stuff together, it's not a fun thing to be around. So, in all likelihood, they're not going to be knocking on your door and joining you for a cup of coffee. However, that's the way I experienced these beings the first 6 years. But I can tell you that after several months of abductions and interaction with them, the human body is resilient. It does adjust. And you actually start to tolerate these sensations and you stop blacking out. So you'll feel miserable maybe for a minute or two and you get used to it and it doesn't bother you. But for myself, I didn't ask for any of this stuff to happen. When I did everything I could to get away from these guys. It started off dreamlike for me, meaning that I thought I was having the same reoccurring dream, which went this way. I would be sleeping. I would be escorted off my bed by these things, or little things, walk through the hallway into the guest room, and then we would walk through my window in the guest room, through the yard, and into the woods. I had no memory of what took place in the woods at that time, and then they would bring me back the same way, through the lawn, through the window, and back into the bed. One particular evening, I became conscious during this experience, for the most part totally conscious as it was going on. And I'll never forget that how it hit me when we walked through the window. In my yard at that time, I was living in outside of Houston in those years, in '88. In my yard at that time, we had thousands of these little honeysuckle flowers that would stick to your feet. And I called them honeysuckle flowers for lack of a better description. It was bushes that had these little things, and there was nectar in it, and when we were kids, we'd suck the little nectar out of it and stuff like that. So they would stick to your feet. And on that particular evening, after that experience or that dream, I went into that guest room, and I could see my footprints in the lawn. I could see the heel of a foot embedded in the lawn, and it was the window was ground level. And I could see the ball of my feet and toes embedded into the carpet. So here's a heel in the lawn, and here's the toes and the ball of my feet in the carpet. And in the carpet were the little honeysuckle flowers that would stick to your feet, and the prints were embedded across the carpet in that room. And so I knew something was going on. That was their introduction. That was their way of doing these things, what I call being pulled the easy way. Whenever a craft is on the ground, that's the technology that's used to escort you. They take matter, they vibrate it somehow, create a field, and you can actually walk through things. What happened next was what I'm going to refer to as going the hard way, which was horrific. When a craft is in flight or hovering, and they want to pull matter from point A to point B, being a human being, the first thing you sense is a low-pitch, whirling, whipping sound, very low RPM at first, inside your head. That gets louder and faster. The RPMs increase. The next thing is you feel a sensation in the pit of your stomach, and it works its way up to your upper torso. Now, if you happen to be laying in the bed or laying on the sofa or wherever you may be, you're now paralyzed at this point. You can't open your eyes. When that sensation hits your upper chest where your heart is, your heart starts beating at like 200 miles an hour or 1,000 miles an hour is what it feels like. The sound gets louder, the RPMs increase, and then you're jolted with a sense of acceleration. But instead of feeling like you're being pulled up, you actually get the sensation that you're being pulled down, like you're going down a roller coaster only 100 times faster. You're screaming in your head, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, and the RPMs are increasing, the sound is getting louder, the G-forces are becoming even stronger, and then you black out totally. You lose consciousness. When one regains consciousness, they're at point B. So that wasn't very pleasant. So here I'm having this, in their way, this reoccurring dream that was kind of gentle on me, so to speak, meaning that I was being escorted to this craft, and then it developed to ladder radiate to this being pulled the hard way. Now this is how these guys were. When I got pulled the hard way, I found myself in the same place every time. In this room, on board a craft, sitting on a bench. In front of this bench was a table, a screen table, which was it was artificial intelligence. It was a teaching machine. About 5 or 8 feet in front of that was a wall with a screen on it. And I was totally paralyzed with the exception of the fact that I could move my head up and down, which is to look at this table screen and look at that wall screen. And my right arm always rested on this table screen, and I could move my wrist and my right forefinger to make markings, and when I made these markings, they would either traces that either appear on this this screen on the wall, or they would appear on this artificial teaching machine, which was this table in front of me. Now, my very first evening there, that's how I found myself, describing the way I just got pulled, finding myself on board like this, not knowing where I was, why I was there, who these things were. After all of that, totally paralyzed except being able to move my head up and down on my finger, and I could move my mouth and my vocal cords. So the first thing was, hi, it wasn't anything like, no social skills, like, hi, how are you, would you like to be part of this experiment, or would you like to, or we're from wherever we're from, nothing like that. Excuse me, the block letter A appears on this screen, and next to it was a symbolic form, And at that time, I called it an alien alphabet. I didn't know what the hell to say it was. And I was instructed to trace and convert that A and trace and learn how to do it and convert it into that symbolic form, which I refused to do. Because I'm screaming and yelling, who are you? Why am I here? What is this? And all this stuff. And at the same token, they're telling me something as simple as start tracing this thing. Well, I refused to do it, and I soon learned that the method of training in those early years was punishment and reward, meaning that when I would say no, the air pressure in the room would increase, and it hurt my ears like a thump. And then it would increase in levels until it was so agonizing that I would do the first stroke to that symbol, and then boom, I would be home, the same way I was taken. That went on 2-3 times a week, several times a month for the first 18 months. Now, I guess you can imagine, now here I am, I'm this straightforward, honest guy, and I'm going around telling family, I'm telling friends. At that time, I was involved with the church, and you know, my friends figured, well, Jim's a nice, good, logical, down-to-earth, truthful person, but he lost his mind. When I went to church, all the seats were empty next to me. Pastor said it was demonic. And I go, yeah, right, devils fly around in UFOs. But nonetheless, my family figured I lost it, and it was terrible. And because for time, I really can't go into a lot of detail, but I think you're getting the picture here. I was running a good, successful business. It traumatized myself. The trauma screwed up business. It messed up my marriage. I even saw my wife on board a few times, and now I'm going to escape these guys, and so I went on this venture on trying how am I going to get away. I would go to the center of a huge downtown area, find the biggest building or hotel, and rent a room in the middle thinking, okay, they can't get me. Well, guess what? They would abduct me. I would drive hundreds of miles, and I'd go from state to state, check out a hotel room thinking, all right, I can get away this way. And of course, they would abduct me. I maintained 95-98% total conscious recall without the benefit of hypnotic regression, and for whatever reason, these characters decided, at least that's how I saw them then, to let this person maintain the memory instead of taking it away. Now I know from years of experience with this stuff is when people are abducted or pulled, they definitely pull the memory from you. You may have scattered memories later, but this person retained it all. Then I abandoned my home in Texas and got me another place all the way in South Florida where I had grown up, Southwest Florida. And of course, they pulled me over there until I finally woke up one day and said, you know, Jim, these things come a godzillion miles, and I think I'm going to go a few hundred miles and get away. Forget it. Now, I went through all of these things. I lost 35, 40 pounds of weight. I got to the point, and this is now the first 18 months, 2 years of this. Now, here I'm being forced to learn this stupid alphabet every time I go there. Every time I was pulled, part of the process was semen extraction, emotional experiments. Nothing made sense. And all I wanted to do was, and I told them, if I could ever get free, I would squeeze your fat heads off your skinny little necks. And I just loathed them with everything that you can imagine. This business went on for the first several years. There was no rhyme or reason. I couldn't understand why. I had gotten to the point where I had lost all this weight. My face got all bearded. I wasn't showering. I wasn't eating. My whole mission was to try and kill these guys. And then one morning I woke up and I said, you know something? I looked at myself in the mirror and said, there's nothing you can do about this. Get yourself straight. And, you know, I started eating again and got my health back and so forth. But, however, what had started to take place was, which was a radical change, which was the experiments that they started doing were leading up to this person having freedom on board and movement on board and starting to see an agenda. Prior to that, what I learned about this so-called alien alphabet, which was phenomenal, which was they converted block lettering from A to no Q's and Z's. Don't ask me why, but no Q's and Z's. And it was converted into this symbolic form. And then there's a shorthand version of the symbolic form, and here's where it gets really scientific and really fascinating. It led up to, this is where my attitude slowly started to change too. They brought up 50 pages of text in block lettering. It was a story about a friend of mine named Jerry. And in this story, it talked about where he was born, when he was born, page after page, and I'm reading this, and it got right to the point where we were at that day and time, and then the story kept going into the future. And then when it was finished, I screamed out, "Why are you making me read this crap?" Forgive the term, but why are you doing this? And what's the point? Well, then the next page that came up, and by the way, this was on the screen, the next page that came up was like a paragraph or less than a half a page of this symbolic stuff that I had been forced to learn. And I could read that whole thing in a matter of 20 or 30 seconds and understand the whole story. Okay, then it got even better. They took something that looked like the size of a 50-cent piece coin, and it had those symbols in shorthand form on this coin, and that whole story, in a split second, by looking at it, I got it. So the best way I can describe something like that, and I like to use this, would be, let's see, what's Independence Day? Everybody knows that movie, right? Let's say you've never seen it. So they could take that whole movie on that little symbol, the size of a 50-cent piece, flash it in front of your face, and you would get that whole 2-hour or whatever it is long movie in an instant. So this became a way of taking data instantly. I started seeing something there. I also started seeing the fact that it was a basic foundation for telepathic communication between human beings. Now, I wanted to kill these guys still. I still had no love for them. So I made up my mind, this is one of my favorite stories out of all this horror, that there was no doubt I was going to kill an alien. And from time to time, these things would come into my home, as if observing the laboratory mouse in his natural conditions. So this is how crazy it got. I would be sitting around in my house, these things would come through the wall, walk around the house and tinker around with things. Of course, nobody believed me. Of course, I wasn't telling, I learned that if I kept my mouth shut, Jim was okay. Now, we're talking 12 years ago or 15 years ago now. More like 12, 13 years ago. And so I determined that I was going to kill one of these guys whenever they came around into the house. So I went over to the gun shop and I bought a .357 Magnum. And then I went to the liquor store and I bought a fifth of vodka. And now, you got to remember too, this is before, because I was so run down with all this trauma, this is now before I had cleaned up. Okay, so I kind of jumped around in the story, meaning that I didn't let it get to me anymore. So if you can imagine, here's this guy who looks like the last days of Howard Hughes, with the fingernails, the whole smear, sitting on my easy chair with a .357 in one hand and sipping on this bottle of vodka in the other to get my courage up. And on that particular evening, there was noise on the roof, and lo and behold, I knew they were coming in. When they had come through the living room, I had the pistol in my hand and I cocked it. One of them walked in front of me. He faced me, but he turned and he walked over to my television set and started fooling with it. And I took the pistol and I pointed it right to the back of his head. And I screamed out at him. I said, "You guys are so highly technical, you come a god," blah, blah, blah. I made up cuss words for these guys. "Damn zillion miles, and you don't even know how to turn on a TV. I'm going to kill you." And I couldn't pull the trigger. And I started crying, weeping. And then he turned around and telepathically said, "We know you're not a killer." An event that happened, and this is leading up to something, an event that happened before that, now this is getting to be around as the years are progressing, another interesting event that led to my newfound freedom on board, which led to that, was I was on this stupid bench where I normally am with this stupid same setting, but this time they had a huge ant on the table. And the best way I can describe it is like a farm ant. It was like an inch or more in length, maybe an inch and a half, very big, very noticeable. And he seemed to be trapped in some sort of an energy field, which was a circle, like as if you put a jar on top of it, but you couldn't see the jar. And so they then said, draw the symbol for kill, and it'll kill the ant. We want you to kill the ant. I said, no. I'm not killing anything for you. And then draw the symbol for the ant, for kill. I would not do the symbol for kill. Then the air pressure increased in the room. Then the pain got agonizing. And then what motivated me to go was the fact that it went through all those levels of pain and discomfort, but I would not break down to draw the symbol for kill. And then they hologrammed out, which was very common, really lovely personalities these guys have, really understanding and warm, you know what I mean? And they hologrammed out what looked like my brother. Well, it was my brother, and he was in a hospital, and he was in the hospital bed clutching his heart as if he was dying of a heart attack. So the message was, if you don't do this, harm is going to come to your family. So that freaked me out, so I did the symbol for kill. The ant crumpled up in a ball and died. I wept again. Then later was the thing with the gun. This is when I decided I was going to kill him. Okay. Now, that's what leads up to a video that we're about to see in this person that I'm talking about. Why on earth are you guys doing this to me? Okay, was what I would think. Why are you putting me through this? Well, what that was all about and what it worked its way up to was they don't have social skills. They are the nature of the way I described them, but what it was leading to was the fact that I was going to start getting information, this person, and I was going to be allowed freedom on board, and the concern would be if I was and not paralyzed, would I go around killing them and breaking things up? Okay, so that's the experiments that led up to that stuff. So a fascinating thing took place. I got pulled. Now you got to remember, this is 6 years of this pure unadulterated hell. Just want to time this right for the movie and the time we have, the video, of this pure unadulterated hell. Finding myself in the same room all the time, going through this thing week after week, month after month, year after year. Now I was lucky. I had a buffer. I had a pretty good business going. I had a partnership. One side of my business was a partnership, and my partner was running that end, so that saved me there, and the money that I had made years previously buffered me through all these years at that time. But one event that led to the total freedom, which was pretty cool, I found myself, I got pulled, and when I got to point B, going the hard way, here I was in this room, but this time I was standing up, and I was like, I could move. And I was leaning against that table that I had been sat before, that screen table, for 6 years. And I had full movement of my body. And I'm in this room, and I'm in there by myself, and there's no one else in there, and I can move around, and I'm thinking, what the hell's going on? So now I'm just turning my head, I'm looking around, and I could see, now there were several smaller events that led to this, but for the sake of time, it kind of led to what this was. I could see a little corridor where they always came in, and I said, well, should I walk over there? I don't know what I should do, or should I stay here? I said, well, the hell with it, I'm going to walk over there, I'm free. So I walked over to that corridor, and then I looked inside, and it was a wall to the right, and to the left, it was another hallway, narrow, not very high, because these guys, oh, by the way, there's two types. There's the worker beings, which are the ones that are typically abductees, presumed to be aliens, and what I've learned over the years is that those are programmable, literally task performers. They're half robotic, they're half biological. Those are the ones with the giant eyes. Then there's what I call the true aliens, which are the grays, which are about 1.5 feet taller. Their craniums and heads are a little bit bigger than ours, but not giant like the little worker ones. Their eyes are bigger than ours, but not the giant teardrop ones. And they do have facial features, meaning that their face looks leather-like, and then you can see different wrinkles on to distinguish different ones. But they do have the two holes for a nose and a thin mouth, but they're biological ones, and the other ones are the worker bees. And this hallway was set for them, of course, and I walked down that hallway, and then it opened up to another corridor. When I looked inside of it, I saw rows and rows of gurneys with these beings laying on their back with what looked like sheets on them, staring into the ceiling. And they were some kind of a hybrid thing, but I got the impression that they were dead. So I panicked, and I started yelling out, "They're dead! They're dead! They're dead! Ah!" Right? And remember I told you they can screen image? So all of a sudden, all those faces on those things that were in that room turned around and looked at me at the same time, and they became women. Okay? And they all had blonde hair and red lipstick. Now, this is the screen image. He goes, "We're not dead, we're fine." And I went, "Oh, okay. All right." And I blacked out. Then there was another event where, as I mentioned, semen extraction was at the end of almost every abduction. You couldn't go away without that. And they screen image things in your mind. Again, if you're afraid of things, then they make it a fearful thing. The path of least resistance, whatever it takes to get what they want. And in one particular case, I was laying on this gurney, and I was, it was like I was leaned up at about a 45-degree angle. What do you call those beds? We were talking about it early, Steve. The stomatics, or the kind that you can lean up. So I'm at a 45-degree angle. And it's a relatively comfortable bed. This is what my mind is thinking. I've learned how to shake these things off. And then in comes to the room, are two women, and they're attractive. And gee, imagine that. They find what I think's attractive in my mind and make it so, right? And I'm laying there on the gurney, and they walk up to me, and one starts playing with my hair. And the other one goes, "Oh my, isn't he handsome?" Well, as soon as I heard that, I knew that was a lie. So I shook my head, and bink, bink, they disappeared. And here in front of me I was on this metal hard gurney. There was a worker being on the right, a worker being on the left of me, and then there was a true alien had this apparatus on my groin, and it was extracting semen. I reacted. Now, you got to remember, I'm always paralyzed. This is when they're starting to let me be a little more free. They eased into this stuff. I didn't blow their brains out, right? Okay. And all that, so I didn't kill the ant. Okay, so now when I saw this, what I saw, it was a knee-jerk reaction. I didn't like it, so I shoved him with my foot. So that was the first time I did anything like that. He went over backwards, and when he got his balance, he came back up. And as I'm laying there, I'm going, "Oh my God, what is he going to do?" And he comes right up to my face, really fast, just right into my face, maybe 2 inches right there. And within a second, he telepathically communicated approximately 100 thoughts with 100 emotions so fast, like zzz, but I'll slow him down a little. "Why did you kick me? You know you shouldn't kick me. It's bad to kick me. It could hurt me to be kicked. I can hurt you if you kick me. I think I will hurt you." And it was this, and it happened so fast that I couldn't take it all, and I just went, zzz, and I passed out. Now, I started thinking about the way I was after I had gotten back. Well, they turned me loose. They're showing me their handiwork for the first time, and I'm screaming and yelling. I'm panicking. Boy, I'm really doing well. When I'm on the examination table this time, I kick one of them, okay? So am I ever going to get pulled again? Well, this is what led up to an event that changed everything. I had gotten pulled, and instead of finding myself on board again, see, things were starting to change. And here we are working into our 7th year, and this was a phenomenal event. I found myself in a clearing in the woods. Now, in this clearing, I would say it was approximately the size of a football field. All trees, cleared out about the same diameter of a football field. And I was standing up, fully mobile, and below me was about a dozen to 15 people sprawled out on the ground, And you could tell that they were just pulled from sleeping at home. Some of them were nude, some of them were in their nightgowns, some of them with just lightly, hardly any clothes on at all. And there was one guy standing up next to me, fully dressed. I'll never forget his face, I'll never forget his frame. He had a short sleeve shirt on, he had dress trousers on, he had brown shoes, and he kept saying was, "I was driving my car, I was driving my car." That's all he knew, is he was driving his car, mumbling. Next to me was another pilot and an ET standing up. These people were paralyzed that were on the ground. He could move, I could move. Next to me, there was another pile of people just thrown on the ground, 12 to 15 approximately. And next to them was another pile of people. So here's the telepathic message I got. Oh, by the way, so he's going like, "Oh, I don't know where I was, why am I here?" And then there's a girl that was in a fetal position, partially paralyzed, rocking back and forth, and she was scared. She was conscious. The rest of them were sprawled. So the first telepathic message to me was, "Calm them." Okay, so this is stuff started coming through my mind. What I didn't realize, and what this developed into, was a typical mass abduction. And I'll tell you what happened during that mass abduction. But now I'm thinking, hey, I got a job, okay? So I'm pretty naive. You know, what do they call that syndrome? I always forget the name of it. Anybody that listens to me talk about this, I always say it's Stockholm, right? You know, or now you're a trustee, whatever, okay. But it's better than being paralyzed sitting at that stupid table, right? And I should tell you about the air. You know, we're all talking about the air tonight. When you're in those rooms on board, the way they do the air filtration is the air will get hot, steamy, extremely humid, and then it'll start getting hard to breathe. And it's if they open up these vents and there's a blast of fresh air. And so like every 20 or 30 minutes or longer in sequel, so it's not like when you're in a plane and you're getting this constant flow. So however they do it, you're almost gagging before you'll get this blast of fresh, cool, dry air, and then it builds up like that. And anything is better than that. So I told the guy, I go, "Hey, look, man, you'll be okay. That sickness you're feeling in your stomach, that dizziness will pass in a few minutes. You'll be fine." And then I walked up to the girl, and I put my hand on her shoulder, and I said, "Oh, you'll be fine." I said, "They're going to take you, and they're going to put you in this room, and they're going to teach you this alphabet," and you know, and so then the ET, the gray telepath was, "You're telling her too much. Just calm her," because it wasn't making her feel better. And then I said, "No, you're going to be fine." There was moans and groans from the people on the ground, as if they knew something was going to happen. They were anticipating something. And over to my left, out in this clearing in the woods, into the horizon, were 3 balls of light. Now, this was an overcast evening. That first ball, and they looked, and I've described it this way, I always describe it this way, they look like those million candle lights that you see for shopping centers and when they're advertising. Because it was overcast, it just looked like a ball of light. The first one just went from the horizon, zoop, right over our pile of people, above the clouds. You couldn't see it yet. The second light went to the second pile of group of people. And then the third light from the horizon went over the third. Then the one that was over us descended from the clouds, below the clouds, and then now for the first time, after all those years, I saw what they were like from the outside. It did not look aerodynamic. That's what I expected it to look like. It had a sphere, metallic. It had a dome, but on the bottom there was like an egg-shaped thing on the bottom, and then there were windows around it, and I could see the silhouettes and scurrying of ETs, and I later learned human beings in there, military. Then this light emanated from it that was an extreme bright white light with a hue of blue. But when that light came out and I saw that ship, I just stepped out from that crowd and I just put my hands in the air and went, "It's beautiful! It's beautiful!" Then the next ship descended down, the light came down. The third ship descended down, the light came down, emanating over these groups of people. And then I just started yelling out, "They're all beautiful, they're beautiful." I did a symbol for high. I had the frame of mind to, well, why not just hand signal something that I've learned? And as soon as I did that, I blacked out. When I regained consciousness, I was in this corridor where all these people were that were sprawled out all over the ground, only they were standing up, zombie-like. I was standing in the front, and here's this guy again that I'm talking about. He's standing next to me. The next telepathic message was, lead them. Okay, then I'm thinking, I always make this joke, what, lead them to slaughter? What do you mean lead them, okay? So I had a sense about me to know it wasn't going to be bad, and I started walking forward, and as I would take a step, these other people would take a step. When I would stop, they would stop, and they were not conscious of what they were doing. This guy had his hand on top of my hand, and again, I'm seeing this person close. This is a face I'm not going to forget. And when I led them to the corridor, opened up to this huge, giant room that looked like a gymnasium, and it was scurrying with activity. Up against the back of it were grays and military individuals working with gizmos or whatever. There was activity all the way across the back, and there were nothing but rows and rows and rows and rows and rows of what looked like monitors, like these little desks with a monitor on it. And the next telepathic command was seat them. So I took this guy, walked him down that aisle to the furthest one, and I sat him in front of this monitor. As I was coming back, I stopped halfway to look around to see what was going on, because I'm curious. Now, man, I'm seeing people, I'm seeing military, I'm seeing grays. What the hell are we doing here? And I'm curious, and the telepathic voice went, no. I was stubborn. I kept looking. No. So after about the third no, I blacked out. When I came to, I found myself sitting in front of my monitor. Now, this place held hundreds and hundreds of people, so they were all now human beings in these rows, sitting in front of these monitors, and then they all lit up at the same time. And I always describe it this way. When you go to buy a television set in some of these places, and they'll have 50 TV screens playing the same channel, and you know, so how all the light glow is all the same. So you can tell in that room we were all seeing the same thing. Now, I can explain a little bit about scoop marks and what a part of that is all about. We either had stuck in us in our behind our forearms or in our calves a tube. Now, what I know this to be later was something to stimulate and heighten to the extreme your emotions, but I'll describe why. So now we're all sitting in this thing, and when the monitor lights up, the first scene that we see was an earth scene. It was the ocean. Crystal turquoise, beautiful blue. Color like you've never seen. Teeming with fish. The sky was just crystal clear. And so now you've got this thing stuck in you, you're seeing this, and you're knowing that you're looking at an Earth scene before we screwed things up and populated the planet. And all you can do is go, it's just taking the adrenaline in your heart just racing, going, oh my God, it's beautiful, it's beautiful. Now that would stay up there about 3 seconds. You would hear a hum. It would go black, and then hum. Another scene would come up, and it was a mountain scene. And drop-dead gorgeous mountains with snow on the top and beautiful, healthy trees, and again with the clear sky. Hum. It would go away, then hum. There would be another drop-dead, beautiful earth scene. So the people that were in there were just so infatuated and so into the color and the beauty of it, and you know it's your planet, and it was one beautiful scene after the other, after the other, after the other, just taking your breath away. And then the scenes slowly became ugly, where the beautiful ocean was now a brownish, mousy brown, bloated fish in the water, the air was polluted, and now you're the opposite. You're going, oh, no, you can't, so whatever it is in you is being amplified by all of this. Another scene would come where the mountains were gorgeous, the trees were acid burn on the top, the sky was polluted, Now the telepathic message that everybody got was on each scene. It was the same thing over and over again. You're killing your planet. Your planet is dying. You're killing your planet. Your planet is dying. I couldn't take it anymore. And I looked at the bottom left-hand side of the screen. I started noticing on the ugly pictures, there were symbols, like a filing system. So to distract me from looking at these ugly scenes, I started trying to decipher the symbols, because see, hey, I'm learning the symbols now, right? So, and then here, just like one-word commands like you would tell a dog. No, yes, no, right? So right across the screen, and it wasn't in alien symbol form, and telepathically was no. Like, look at this, okay? You have to face this. And I'm still looking at the symbols, and then no, no. And I ignored those commands because I didn't like what I was looking at. I blacked out. When I came to, I was in something that was like a gymnasium, and so were all the people that were in that group, other than the other hundreds, perhaps even close to 800, 900. They weren't there, just the ones that were in the three piles were in this room. Clothes were spewed all over the place, whatever clothes. Everybody was naked. And that guy, again, oh my arm, complaining about his arm. Everybody, this one's crying about their arm. Again, calm them. Now, I knew that whenever I would cut myself or hurt myself in all those years of experience, that they would heal real quick, unnaturally so. And so here again with this guy. Now, we all got these earth lessons, right? And then whatever that I don't have a memory of, which later came. And he's complaining the most. I go, hey, look, man, you're going to be fine. I get cut up all the time out here. He says, this thing will be fine when you get home. You won't even notice it. And I'm saying this to the same girl. And on a funny note, it was then the telepathic message came to everybody, which was, no one gets to leave until they find their exact clothes. And so here's these people crying and whining, and all of a sudden everybody's diving all over the place trying to find their stuff. And I came back. Okay, this was one event that changed everything and how I started seeing things, because now I started seeing an agenda. And that was the beginning of it. And now we're still talking 10, 11, 12 years ago. Now this individual, his name is Douglas Rodante. Doug Rodante, Doug, that I'm talking about. That was his name. Several months later, after that mass abduction, I go to a UFO conference, and I wasn't speaking at that time. I started going to an abductee support group thing, and they said you should go to these things and hear what other people have to say, yada, yada, yada. So I went to like my first one, and I was standing out there at the sidewalk in between talks, and here comes this guy, and he's got one of these huge cameras on his shoulder like they do for the news, you know, and he's walking down the sidewalk, and I went, oh my God, that's him. I recognized him instantly, but I bit my tongue. I wasn't going to say nothing. He walked by me, he looked at me, he kept going, and as he's going, all of a sudden, he stops, and this whole thing's wobbling, and he turns around, he walks up there, and he goes, do I know you? For months, I never said anything to this guy, because what I wanted to see was what effect that abduction had on an individual without any interference from me. He goes, do I know you? I said, no, I don't think so. Boy, that was hard. And this guy had no interest in the environment. He had no interest in the UFO phenomena, none of that. The only reason he was there was because he owned a company called Infinite Communications, and he was contracted to interview, or someone was going to interview, and he was just going to do the camera work for that thing. And then I said, no. He says, well, what are you doing here? I said, well, you know, I started talking about my experiences. Then I watched his face change. I knew that was in the mind. Didn't say nothing. He says, you know what might be an interesting thing to do? He says, I have this company, and he says, I'd like to do a documentary and yada, yada, yada. And that's what led to the video I'm about to show you. However, this person today, now he does know who I am. We do know the story. But what you're going to see here is a guy that towards the end of this documentary, that he is the, what do you call the guy? Not the announcer, but the commentator. The interviewer, yeah. Throughout this whole thing, this is Doug. You're going to see how he's asking questions and he's going along, because this thing took months to make. And then towards the end, how the environmental lessons kicked in, how he changed, and then, of course, him knowing who I am, and I can get into a little more detail after the video. So I would like you to watch him as this thing's based on my story, but it's got Linda Moulton Howe, it's got all the greats in it, so I'm sure you'll enjoy that. And then from there, then I'm going to tell you about another message and some other interesting things. So that'll take, if you can show it now.
It may be human nature to wonder if other intelligent life exists in the universe, or perhaps other dimensions. Within 54 light years of Earth in our own galaxy, there are at least 1,000 stars, 46 of which are similar to the Sun in that planets orbit them. Scientists say it is feasible to have life on at least 1 out of 22 of these planets. If this is so, the question is, are we being visited by extraterrestrials? Well, the United States government officially says no, even though they outline UFO history and hazards in their official Field Guide to Disaster Control. Internal requests by Congress to release information pertaining to incidents that have happened decades ago, such as the famous UFO retrieval of Roswell, New Mexico, have continually been denied.
The Air Force put out a new report that said, indeed, this wasn't the weather balloon that we've said it was. It was something called Project Mogul, which was supposed to be a high-altitude, low-frequency listening device suspended by balloons in the upper atmosphere designed to detect possible Soviet nuclear testing, which, of course, wouldn't actually it wouldn't happen for 2 more years and would theoretically take us by surprise at that point. One particularly interesting note was that a lot of files have been destroyed, evidently some decades ago, without the proper paper trail that would document where they went.
Additional evidence to a government cover-up at Roswell was discovered during a research project at Curlin Air Force Base by award-winning filmmaker and author Linda Howe.
Our government was retrieving what was described in this alleged government document. They were retrieving crashed discs and non-human entities, both alive and dead, prior to July of 1947 in the now famous Roswell incident. That would mean that the Truman administration already knew about discs and non-human entities before the crash between Corona and Roswell. And it may also be why that there was a leak, but they were prepared to handle the leak with the weather balloon story.
The issue of the government cover-up policy, and the reason why it's so damaging, is because the government, by saying UFOs don't exist and therefore abductions don't exist, they're telling every single person who's had this experience, you didn't have this experience. The official policy is you didn't have it. You're either a liar or you're somehow mentally deranged. You didn't have this experience. That's the effect of the government policy. That's the effect of the damage that it does to human beings, because obviously that official policy then filters down to psychiatrists, school counselors, rabbis, priests, you name it, all of whom are equipped to say officially, based on what the government has said, you didn't have this experience. You had something else. You're either lying or you're mentally ill.
The explanation still given to many is that these sightings are man-made objects, perhaps even military. Veteran pilot and forensic scientist David Rudd explains the results of a 7-second close encounter with a bright yellow cylindrical-shaped object traveling at an estimated speed of over 5,000 miles per hour.
Would have been going down at about 5,200 miles an hour and to go to straight and level, the delta V right there at the point where it went from a down angle to straight and level would have subjected that to about 237 Gs, which is pretty substantial for anything to go like that. Human body will black out at about 8 or 9 Gs, the standard person will. So
John Mack, MD, is professor of psychiatry at the Cambridge Hospital, Harvard Medical School, and founding director of the Center for Psychology and Social Change. Winner of the Pulitzer Prize, Dr. Mack is a groundbreaking pioneer of abduction research and is author of the recent best-selling book, Abduction: Human Encounters with Aliens.
There's not a bit of evidence that any of these craft are man-made. They don't behave like aircraft or missiles that have been constructed by human beings. They don't follow the laws of gravity. They appear to be, if not extraterrestrial, at least coming into our atmosphere by some principle we don't understand, perhaps from another dimension.
You put all this together, you say that if we Earthlings could build things like that in the 40s and 50s, we would no longer be building F-16s, 17s, 18s, MiG-29s, Mirage 5s. Since we are still building those aircraft, what was observed back then wasn't built here. And if it wasn't built here, it was built someplace else. Therefore, by definition, it's extraterrestrial.
For a long time, from the 40s through the 60s at least, most of ufology, or the formal study of UFOs, tended to deal in these claims that objects were flying around. Since that time, and most especially now in the 90s, the focus of attention has shifted to claims that human beings are encountering unusual beings of off-world origin or alien origin.
They were hairless. They didn't have slanted eyes. Their eyes were straight across. They were dark. They had not a real large nose, but it was more, it wasn't flat. And they had small nostrils, and they had very thin lips. But their mouths didn't open.
Eyewitness accounts began to accumulate of actual face-to-face encounters with something that would be in the category of 4 feet tall, grayish-green skin, enormous black slanted eyes, and, what the eyewitnesses say, are non-human entities.
Claims of conscious face-to-face encounters with extraterrestrials are not as common as the, quote, dream-like abduction experiences, which are happening worldwide.
Estimates range from hundreds of thousands to several million people in the United States have had these experiences, and around the world, although there are reports from many countries of these of this phenomenon, there are no reliable data.
So far as I can tell, I've never seen any absolute pattern that would suggest a type of person who has had abduction experiences. I've dealt with everything under the sun. I've dealt with, just in terms of professions, I had a NASA research scientist come to me as an abductee. I've had, so far, 8 psychiatrists come to me because of their abduction experiences. I've had police officers, military, people in show business, well-known people.
Cuts across economic groups, racial groups, blacks, Jews, Protestants, Catholics, you name it.
Black, white, old, young, rich, poor, straight, gay, every possible type you can imagine. And I've worked in places like Brazil, Australia, Europe, working with abductees there. So it's a global phenomenon.
There are not enough words to describe the extreme emotions one may feel when coming in contact with extraterrestrial beings. There's a great deal of mystery and misunderstanding associated with this phenomenon due to partial or no recall in many abductees. However, top researchers like David Rubian have singled out a gentleman by the name of Jim Sparks, who has almost complete, total recall. His abduction experiences have brought amazing insight into an otherwise speculative alien agenda.
Jim remembers more than any other individual I've come in contact with without the benefit of hypnosis. But his experiences not only are so vivid in what he's actually has gone through, but I can see that what he's telling is the truth.
The Jim Sparks story is one of the most significant in the human abduction syndrome because the majority of his experiences he had as an experience consciously.
The fact that Jim has had those recollections, and other people have had them too, and they seem reliable, they seem a pattern, of course adds credibility to Jim in general. And so I've had never a reason to doubt his credibility.
Well, I think it's valuable that Jim Sparks has made a record in such detail of the information that's come to him, the language that he's taken down, the rapidity with which he notices that information comes to him in this process. And so it's very concrete and can be compared with what other people report, and again gives a certain authenticity and validity to it if we find that others are having the same experiences and putting down the same formulations and symbols, because it's not something that somebody could really make up on their own.
There's an estimated hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of people around the world who have abduction experiences that are fragmented, some with no conscious recall at all. Why are you one of the few that has almost 95% total recall?
Well, I feel it might be for several reasons, but one in particular is that I never went along with any agenda that they had in mind. One could say that I fought them tooth and nail.
You didn't cooperate with them at all?
No, particularly in the early years.
Was that harder on you in essence?
Much. I think it brought out I think the will or the fight against them brought out the ability for me to retain a lot of the things that were going on. Secondly, I believe that there are humans that, for whatever reason they pick them, they want to retain the memory or the experience of the abduction. I just happen to be one of those.
What is your emotional state when you come face to face with these beings?
Well, I've been dealing with them for 9 years now. The first several years, it was horrible.
How horrible?
Pure trauma. Well, for starters, you're somewhere that you don't want to be. That in itself is scary. I didn't want anything to do with this, period.
I would imagine it'd be hard to accept the fact that it's happening at all.
Oh, yeah. Well, getting into that, it's... Accepting it yourself is one thing. Explaining it to others is another.
Right.
The aliens themselves radiate an energy or vibration that paralyzes you. Fear, yeah, sure, you're paralyzed in fear, but it also paralyzes your mind and your body.
I know there's a lot of fear connected with it, and there certainly was in my life, but it's not a form of mental illness. It's not a progressive physical disease. We know those things because we're all still fine after years of having had it.
These experiences are complex, ambiguous. We have no control over them, and they're very, very difficult to deal with.
When you're abducted, how often does this occur, and what happens in the abduction process?
It happened quite often. Some cases 2, maybe 4 times a month. Here in the last few years, perhaps it's twice a year, maybe 2 or 3 times a year at the most.
Mm-hmm. And when you get abducted, how does that take place exactly?
Well, there's 2 ways in my experience that one goes. One way I call the easy way, which the worker beings escort you from your home, or in some cases your car, to their craft. One goes the easy way when the crafts are on the ground. I think one goes what I call the hard way when they're actually in flight or hovering over your home. The hard way involves typically I'm sleeping, and then I'll be woken up, and then I'll go back to sleep, sort of like a second sleep or an unnatural second sleep. But I'll be awakened to a low-pitched, low RPM whirling sound that sounds sort of like a whipping whirling sound. I'll hear it in my head, and it'll get louder and louder and louder, tremendously loud. Then I would lose consciousness, and then the next thing, when I regained consciousness, the next thing I knew is I would be there.
So you're not aware of what happens between point A and point B?
Better than 99% of the time, no, you're not.
Evidence suggests that through advanced technology, our current laws of physics simply do not apply. It seems extraterrestrials have the ability to create a field which, among other things, renders invisibility and even interdimensional transport, whereas time seems to be manipulated at will. Aliens have even been seen walking through walls.
To me, it's like any other technology, for example, a television. It's probably the most simplest tool in the world for one to use. On, off, change the channels. However, if one were to tear it apart, if you weren't a technician to try and figure it out, it would be beyond comprehension. The same thing with their technology. They are advanced cultures. After all, they can come here. And to us, when we look at the technology, it seems extremely complicated, almost magical, as a matter of fact. To coin a phrase, their technology is so advanced it seems like magic. But however, after seeing it time and time and time and time again, and not being traumatized by it because of familiarity, I noticed that it's a field they create somehow, and it enables all these wondrous
So you've
things.
become somehow acclimated to the field.
Yes, but you're always scared to death. Perhaps the trauma doesn't, or the fear doesn't last as long each time, but yeah, there's always an overwhelming fear at first, because it is completely unnatural.
According to Jim, their technology also allows them to literally be 80% in one dimension and work 20% in another. In some cases, that is why they can be seen as transparent. You can see right through them because 20% of their working essence is here and 80% may be somewhere else, or whatever number they choose, for example 50-50, 90-10, etc.
Extraterrestrials in a lot of cases can be mistaken as spirits, demons, angels, and I think that's been gone out through history.
What other activities are associated with being abducted?
Well, there seems to be, in almost every case that I'm aware of, poltergeist type activities.
Why is that?
They literally go through dimensions in order to go from point A to point B. And what I've also learned in my experience is that there are other types of entities or things that exist in other dimensions that perhaps are spirits or ghosts. For all I know, it may even be humans.
Are you saying that they follow these beings through these dimensions when these holes or portals are opened up?
Yeah, I think doorways are opened up.
After your return, then, you hear noises.
You do,
and
or
so
you can
forth,
be angry, or if your emotions are really strummed up, something can fall in a back room. Now, how does that tie in? I'm not sure, but I do know things like that go hand in hand during and after the use of extraterrestrial technology.
Most of the peoples of the earth, except the Western man of the past 200 or 300 years, has been aware of other intelligences that come from other dimensions and enter into our world. They were called spirits or divas or whatever, and they were accepted by other cultures. We've simply rid ourselves or destroyed the capability of perceiving this dimension of reality.
How do you communicate with them?
The main source of communication for them is telepathic. They do not speak. I know of no extraterrestrials that speak. There may be some out there. I've never seen or experienced any.
No, we don't communicate, obviously, telepathically on this plane. Why do you think you can communicate with them telepathically in another, let's say, area?
That's a good question. It's medical fact or science fact that we use only, a very small percentage of our brains. I think that there are muscles in our minds that lie dormant or that are atrophied. And I think that these muscles can be activated. So I think once you get around an extraterrestrial's mind and they radiate or communicate telepathically, I think it begins to exercise the muscles that we have naturally that lie dormant. It wakes them up.
Tell us more about the communication with symbols. Are there holographic images involved?
They create holograms or images that literally hang in the air. For lack of a better explanation, I call it a hologram.
For example?
Sometimes before an abduction, not always, I would get the courtesy of a symbol just before being pulled. I like to call it pulled, abducted, to let me know what kind of abduction it would be. An example, a hologram of an owl would appear. When I would see something like that, that would tell me it's time for school. That's what would happen on that abduction. Some cases, a hologram of a medical instrument. Something like a forceps would appear, and that would tell me this abduction would include medical procedures or semen extraction.
In the early years, Jim usually found himself sitting at a table, in an almost completely paralyzed state. In front of him was a screen in which he was forced to learn an alphabet, a number system, and symbols. Over and over again, he converted our letters and numbers to what he thought was their letters and numbers.
As time has gone on, I don't believe that now to be their alphabet per se. I think it was a common ground form of communication. Nothing about this, any of this, is conventional. The symbols, literally like the holograms, hang in the air. Interesting about the symbols, though, if I may explain, I had one experience where I read a story in regular language that I understand, our language, and I would say it was probably about 20 pages long. They can take the same story and put it in their alphabet that I was explaining earlier, which would only take perhaps a half a page. And then they can condense that half a page to a 50-cent coin piece like symbol, and all you have to do is look at it and understand.
The alien language must be done in what we would consider to be three-dimensional space. And that one of the problems of the communication between our species and this other species is that we still are relying on a two-dimensional kind of communication and a verbal stream of words, whereas this other intelligence relies on a three-dimensional, technologically projected symbol communication that is combined with telepathy.
Obviously, their language is more condensed than ours and more effective as well.
They have minds that think 10 to 100 times faster than ours do. They have to slow themselves way down to communicate telepathically. In fact, the more I got abducted, the less they wanted me to rely on telepathic communication and more on the symbolic communication.
You described worker beings in your book.
Right.
What do you mean by worker beings compared to aliens? Is there a chain of command here?
Well, I think it's probably the biggest reasons that extraterrestrials have been involved with humans hundreds, if not thousands of years. I think that they take or extract the raw material that they need in order to create just that, worker beings. I think these are the same beings that most abductees describe. They're the small, atrophied, large head, large teardropped eyes looking creatures. Those are the workers. And then there are the aliens that I call the true aliens, at least in the species that I'm familiar with. They're a little bit taller, and they seem to have a run of things. So yeah, there's workers and there's supervisors, for lack of a better definition.
Now, workers, is this a subspecies? Is it a created species?
Yes, it's created, purely.
Obviously, one of the big questions that we have is why are these encounters occurring from the alien point of view? And my own feeling is it's very difficult to think like an alien. We don't know the answer to that question. We can only make educated guesses. It does seem that some of the so-called aliens are conducting genetic experiments. It does seem as if human women especially are being impregnated, but human men are also being taken, abducted, and sperm samples are taken from these men.
The genetic experimentation, the creation of a kind of hybrid mix of them and us, that's the really central goal that they're really centrally involved with. That's why they're here, really. But along with that is the idea that they're interested in studying human emotions, human sexuality, human feelings of love for one another, especially feelings of maternal and paternal love for our children. All of the things that are sort of basically human, emotionally.
Besides semen and ova extraction, what else are they interested in?
Emotions and our ability to reproduce.
Do they have emotions?
No.
None at all?
If they do, it's a higher form, or it's a form that I don't understand. The best way I could describe that would be if I was a child, an infant, and I wanted ice cream. Although my father or my mother knew it would be time for a nutritious meal, I would scream and yell like a baby that I would be, that I want ice cream, and I would think mom and dad have no feelings and no emotions because they want me to eat vegetables. So perhaps, if you can see where I'm going with this analogy, as humans, our emotions relative to theirs, it's almost the same thing. But I'm not saying they all don't have emotions. I'm saying the ones that I've been dealing with, or have been dealing with me, I should say, in particular, seem very emotionless. There are other races that seem to have emotions, and those are the scaled ones. I think they're commonly referred to as reptilians.
In a sense, it seems like they're almost farming us.
In fact, I think you couldn't put it in a better way. I think that they have been using raw materials from human beings to make these worker beings. Semen from men, genetic material, ova or eggs from women, and I think they've been doing this to human beings in secret, maybe thousands of years.
Besides raw materials for, let's say, worker beings, what other resources do they need from us, or do they steal from us in a sense?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily stealing. It's almost something like what we would do with cattle. Thank God they don't eat us. We do take care of a cow's medical need. We make sure that they have a nice pasture to graze on and so forth. Unfortunately, at the end, they end up at your grocer's freezer. As far as humans are concerned, they've been extracting these raw materials for years and years and years. But I said one reason is they make these worker beings. Another reason I feel almost certain of is for their own longevity. In other words, they have a technology that can extract tissue intact from a human, maybe 1/1000th in size. To give you an example, let's say that field I told you they created, they can actually take 1/1000th of the tissue in an elbow, and you'd wake up in the morning and feel like maybe your elbow's sore. And they can take it and they can overlay it on themselves if the genetic material matches up naturally, and it would regenerate whatever the ailment they may have in the elbow. I think that they farm humans in that way.
So it's more than a coincidence that we have somewhat similar body parts.
I think so. And I think there's a universal rule, which is higher intelligence takes advantage of and uses lower intelligence, not unlike what we do to cattle.
If, as the evidence shows, the aliens are interested in this kind of ongoing genetic, shall we say, tampering or whatever, at least the attempt apparently to connect their stock with our stock, that would explain why they seem to follow a particular bloodline and a particular family. And so if a parent or parents have been abducted, there is sadly likelihood that offspring will be abducted too, not necessarily all of them. And perhaps another generation. I've got cases where there seem to be 4 generations that have had abductions in the same family.
When you say they've been interacting with us for hundreds or even thousands of years, I mean, that's a fairly serious implication. Do you think that they've genetically manipulated our DNA? There are reports that people have heard or been told that from abduction cases.
They've showed me that, for lack of a better definition or word, hologram-looking visuals that led back human history all the way back to these ape-like looking creatures. So the impression I got and what they said as they were showing it was, yeah, we manipulated these creatures to make you who you are today.
On April 9, 1983, I was working on a documentary project for Home Box Office when I had a meeting scheduled at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with an Air Force Office of Special Investigations agent named Richard C. Doty. And in the course of that meeting, he told me something his superiors wanted to share with me, which was an alleged, it said, briefing paper for the President of the United States of America on the subject of identified aerial vehicles. And he told me that I could read it, that I could not take notes, and I could ask him questions. And as it began with a historic summary of our government's efforts to retrieve crash disks and non-human entities, both dead and alive, going back before 1947 into at least the 1950s in the paper that I read. It discussed a live extraterrestrial biological entity referred to later by this man as EBA, who communicated to our government that its civilization had been involved with this planetary history for millions of years, going all the way back to the dinosaurs. And as startling as That concept is that their interaction with the Earth had involved life-seeding projects, harvesting projects, mining projects, a whole series of things. And there was a sentence that said, these extraterrestrials manipulated DNA in already evolving primates to create Homo sapien. And I remember reading that sentence over and over and over again, thinking about the implications, and another sentence in that paper that said, all questions and mysteries about the evolution of Homo sapien on this planet have been answered and this project is closed. All questions and mysteries about the evolution of the human species have been answered, and the government has closed a project inquiring into that question.
Is our military involved or world powers involved with this agenda?
To me, clearly, yes. Probably the most remarkable experience that I ever had was I had gotten pulled or abducted, and I found myself out in an abandoned, what I thought was a carnival yard or something. But I was out in this open area. There were about a dozen beings standing in a semicircle. Now you got to understand, everything about this was different right from the beginning. I was not paralyzed. These beings were standing in a semicircle. They were huge, they were large, they were bigger than anything I've ever seen. And the first words, or telepathic words out of their mouths, was that we would have just given it to you, but you wouldn't have understood that way.
Meaning?
Immediately I figured that to mean the knowledge of what they were up to with abductees, or at least myself.
During this meeting, Jim was told that it was true that there was contact made between extraterrestrials and world powers. It was true our government was made aware of environmental problems. It was also true that, among other things, technology was given to us in order to stop using nuclear weapons. And according to them, we broke our agreements by making weapons and money out of the technology exchanged.
I think if you can take two generals or several generals and they're sitting back listening to this and they're thinking, yeah, well, they're benevolent, all of this is well and good, but my God, these guys can come and go in our skies as they please. They can take people in the middle of the night and there's nothing we can do about it. We need to buy time. We need to negotiate whatever needs to be done so we can catch up with this technology to defend against these guys. You know the military's going to think that way. It's their job to think that way. They're sworn to protect this country. How else can they think? Why didn't they tell the average citizen in that day that these things were happening? We were just getting out of World War II. Orson Welles' experience, I think, showed a lot. I think the closest thing to extraterrestrials in those days was a swamp monster, relative to how experienced people are today. And of course, once again, the paranoia that these creatures can come and go as they please. What if, and I can see military minds thinking this way easily, and I don't blame them. What if we didn't agree with what they wanted to do? What could we do about it? So I think that in those days, they bought time.
The human psyche as a whole, the collective consciousness of humanity is beginning to respond to these stories and these events, and we are beginning to change our consciousness about this subject matter.
Not only has public awareness increased, evidence suggests that certain unnamed organizations who have knowledge to extraterrestrial existence would like to speak out publicly but can't for fear of prosecution.
I don't think the government fears so much that if it were to come forward with the truth, people would panic in the street, or the stock market would drop, the church would collapse. By God, we're human beings, we're resilient. Human beings have always been that way. I think they're more concerned with, gee, what are you going to do to me? Because for the sake of national security, I think a lot of human beings and honest, law-abiding citizens have been hurt. Tremendously so. Perhaps plenty of lives have been lost over this secret. People have been maimed. People have disappeared. And this goes on and on and on and on for the sake of national security. If you provide an avenue for government officials, perhaps even private industry, to come forward and speak the truth about extraterrestrials without being prosecuted. A lot of the technologies that we have, because we do have technologies that can change things for energy, water, and all those things, that we don't need to hurt the Earth to derive the things that we need. There's technologies that can overcome all of that without polluting the Earth at all.
The Earth is on a catastrophic course right now with us at the helm, because what we're doing is lethal to the future of the planet.
Obviously, the fate of this host planet, then, is of concern to them.
This common area that you hear repeated over and over in the human abduction syndrome about why these interactions from a non-human intelligence is the focus on our environment, that we as human creatures are self-destructive, that we are damaging our own planet, and that in the process of this self-destruction of our environment, the implications for our future seem to be hanging in the balance.
What touched me the most was they were really focusing on the environmental problems we're having. They really see these things literally from a different perspective, which is from outer space, high technology, perhaps from other dimensions, and they really see it as, if we don't take care of it, we will no longer be here. That clear, cut, and dry. They tremendously focus in Central and South America and the rainforest. They made it crystal clear the burning of those forests has to stop. It's the heart, it's the soul, it's the lungs of the planet. It's the internal organs of Mother Earth. Sure, you can cut the hand off. We may be disabled, but we keep going. Sure, you can lose an arm. Sure, you can lose both legs. You can be just a torso and live, which I sort of feel that's what the Earth is right now, because I think she's having a tremendous time cleansing and recycling herself. But once you get to the internal organs, nothing, as we know it, will be here anymore. And we're invading that right now as we sit here, as I speak. They made that very clear to me.
Jim and I have been so strongly affected by this phenomenon that we have written and are currently attempting to put an amnesty bill through legislation which will allow those in the know to come forward. We have also organized a foundation to buy and preserve sensitive land in the rainforest.
The Your Earth Foundation, oh there it is in a dormant state, so you can ignore that very last part about contributing it to it all. We're waiting for the timing to be right with that. But anyway, the interesting thing about that gentleman, Doug, is so I got to watch him evolve, and I know it's through these mass abductions. Look, as I was telling Steve outside earlier, I don't claim to embrace alien culture. I have a strong, healthy suspicion of their motives, but it's healthy. But I know that they've been coming and going on this planet for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years perhaps, even more than that. And they want to see an environment here that they can still work with, whether it's in secret or whether it's in conjunction with. However, back to this gentleman, Doug, he, when the tsunami came about, himself and this man from Germany who had developed this water purifier that it doesn't need to be plugged in. You can transport it anywhere. It's about the size of a briefcase. You can literally set it in sewer water, a cesspool. I don't mean to sound gross, but that's how good it is. And it works through solar. It works through wind. And it'll purify 30 gallons of water an hour. And it works. It's 100%. This is real. This is an ET stuff. So at Doug's expense and this other man's expense, they had learned that that there were teenagers, primarily men, young men, coming down from northern India by the hundreds more to help with the bodies and down there, and they were drinking the water, cholera, and dying. So Doug, at his expense and this other gentleman's expense, brought several hundred of those things, flew them halfway around the world, and dispensed them into the hospitals and things like that. So these are things Doug's done. Now, it's another thing he's doing is himself, a former astronaut, and I wish I knew the name, and some leading individuals, world-renowned individuals, science individuals and so forth, are going to fly the first jet aircraft. Well, this ought to get you, Steve, with your flying experience. Jet aircraft around the world, partially fueled with animal waste. So I'm watching as this goes. So what I believe to be so, going from, ripped out of my house in the middle of the night, like many thousands and maybe millions of us have, to not understanding what's going on, to here 19 years later, seeing this thing come to, I believe, close to critical mass in a positive way. So in this abduction scenario, and I don't know how many in this room may be very well involved too, it's like a timing thing. It's like a tape unwinding in your mind, and when the timing is right, you seem to act. And I'm seeing things in global consciousness with global warming and other concerns. But I do want to share an experience that you saw in the video, because 95 to 98% of these experiences have been with what are commonly referred to as grays. There was an eye-opening experience with another species, which are commonly referred to as reptilians. Now, that's what people tell me they are. I had gotten pulled. I found myself in an abandoned, of all places, which make it kind of weird, but I was in an abandoned carnival yard. In this carnival yard was a old dilapidated wooden roller coaster. There were the stands where they would take your money for the games and so forth, abandoned little sheds, gaming sheds and things of that nature. But in this yard were about 9 to a dozen beings that were huge. They were 8, 10 feet tall. They had the bodies of like football linebackers. On their heads, their skulls, their brains seemed to protrude out over their brow, but there was a skull covering, and it was all misshapen. So you could see, maybe that's where the cognitive or the intelligence part of the brain is, which is extended out. And you could see scales on these guys. And when I first saw them, that's the first thing I said. I went, "Oh my God, you got scales." They were the ones that, now my interaction with these things, I've heard that people talk about these reptile-like beings that are things that happen that aren't good. But for me, it was the opposite. They had emotion, they had feeling. They are the ones that said that we should have amnesty, meaning that create an avenue for black op individuals or groups and agencies that are sanctioned or not sanctioned who possess technology to literally change the face of this planet as we know it. We possess the technology now, and it is in human hands in conjunction with ETs. for the first time in our history for the human species to evolve. Many problems that we have, you already know what they are. So if you create amnesty, they can come forward with these things, because their major concern is, what are you going to do to me if I tell the truth about or bring these things forward? Because quite frankly, people have been discredited, law-abiding citizens maimed, murdered for the sake of national security, and not just our country, but countries around the world. And there's a growing majority in these groups that would like to come forward with this information, but they don't want to be prosecuted. Better yet, even executed for some of these things. A big push and a message that I had gotten from these reptoids, or reptilian type beings, was the rainforest, and I found that interesting, and it really touched me. Well, obviously by the mass abduction scenario with the earth scenes, and a way of doing it, which would, when I say the rainforest, I don't mean just Central South America, the Amazon, the equatorial belt, is to buy it. Here's their opinion: buy it. Because first you got greed to deal with. So how does one deal with greed? You satisfy, or attempt to satisfy, greed at its strongest point, which is, hypothetically, if you had 5 million acres of rainforest land, find out what their optimate dream of money would be to purchase it. You double, you triple it. You own it. That's the first advice. Own it. Buyer's rights. Own it. The second step is to let inhabit this property that is now owned globally by the people that are indigenous to that land, which would be the Indians. They get to live in it. Now, you have another problem to address. We've addressed greed, which is corporate, by giving them beyond their wildest dreams and money, and there's plenty of it for this. You're occupying this property with these Indians, indigenous to it. And the third thing is, what do you do with these people who are thrashing and burning? And they're doing that for inadequate housing. They're doing that, and they don't know how to rotate crops, and they just keep thrashing and burning and go on and on. As incentive for replenishing the rainforest, with their labors, the fruits of their labor, the same ones that have been destroying it, it's a global responsibility to give them adequate land outside of the rainforest, and for adequate housing and adequate crop. Teach them how to do that. So why this hands-on project? Because this is something that we can do environmentally, and I'm not talking about global warming at this point, but this is something that we can do as a species on a global basis. That's a hands-on project, because clearly you can see the rainforest as it replenishes itself. Clearly you can see and defend that property. In fact, I think it would be good for even the free world's military to be able to deploy and strengthen their forces by going halfway around the globe and protecting this property. I think it would be healthy for the military, it would be healthy for the economy, it would be healthy clearly for the globe. And it would be a process, according to these guys. When I say these guys, non-human intelligent beings, or the first few steps in cleaning up our own backyard so we can join the galactic neighborhood. A problem that they see also with the human species is the fact that by our very nature, we have an extremely short lifespan. I'm not promoting stem cell research. I'm not going anywhere like that, because there's technology that exists now in the hands of these black operations that will extend your life beyond your wildest dreams. Why is that so important? When the average person lives to be, I think, approximately now 75 to 85 years, lucky if you're 100, about the time we figure it out, that means it's time to die. And that's unfortunate. The best we could ever do is to pass on what we've learned to our siblings, the next generation. But again, by our very nature, we're lucky if they retain our children retain 20 to 30% of our life's experiences. It seems like the other 70 to 80%, they're going to have to learn on their own. They don't listen. Some do, some pick up a lot of it, but not all of it. And it's that same trap and that same cycle that goes on from generation to generation to generation. And we keep making the same mistakes. Wars don't stop happening, and I can go on with it, you know it. And where these beings have an extreme edge on us, and just that area right there is the fact that their lifespans, in a lot of cases, do not end. And they do go on for tens of thousands of years. So if you think about it, if you just took 10 of the best men and women on this planet, and just those 10 their lives could be the best that the planet has to offer, just a small example, and let's say they could live 2,000 years. Think of how they would be 1,000 years from now, what they would know, what they would possess, the knowledge, the learning, the science, and everything that goes with it. So the good news is that this type of technology does exist. It's in human hands. I've seen on many abduction experiences, military individual, black ops individuals, civilian individuals, lab coat individuals, working in conjunction with extraterrestrials. And this stuff has never been hidden from this individual. I've never had problems. I've never been, now, in the early years, I was watched and followed, and that's a different story in itself. But in these latter years, no. So I've had the freedom to talk about all of this stuff. So anyway, I want to thank you for listening to me this evening. I did write a book. It's called The Keepers. And I'll be back there, signing it if anybody wants a copy of it. Also, that I named the book The Keepers because there was and I'll be finished just as I say this. I named it The Keepers because I was driving in the car, and there was what I call like a beacon ship, UFO, diamond shape, meaning it looked like two pyramids stacked on top of each other. And these ships collect seeds of every nature you can think of, and they're automated. They collect plants, animals, everything. And this individual, as I was driving along and saw this thing, had identified itself. And this is a privilege to me. After 19 years of, many years of hell, there's these little spiffs, okay? And the privilege was the keepers are here to take, when I say they're people, they're not talking about humans, they're talking about seeds. The keepers are here to take their people home to a better place. And then an image of this ship inside of it collecting all these seeds of all sorts as an insurance policy. But they referred to themselves, and that was an interesting statement, the keepers. And so I, henceforth, that's what I call the book, and it goes from the beginning of my experiences up to now. Thank you very much.